Welcome to the Season 2 recap of the Regeneration Will Be Funded, a show about regenerative finance, weaving technology, culture, policy, and law to find pathways to an economy that works in harmony with all of life on this magnificent planet. I'm your host, Matthew Monahan, and in this special episode, I want to take you through a recap of Season 2, including the many amazing people we spoke with and events we attended, through a curated selection of some of my favorite sound bites. We're all busy, and I know you probably haven't had time to watch the over 50 hours of content we've produced this season. So think of this as kind of a chef's sampler of some of our learnings and explorations, and maybe something will catch your attention that you want to go deeper on. All of our conversations are posted at maearth.com, and to stay updated, subscribe to our channel and weekly newsletter, as we're adding new episodes pretty much every week. Okay, grab your favorite beverage and let's dive into this Season 2 recap. We started Season 2 off at our home base in Aotearoa, New Zealand. Last year, we built a little media lab in my garage. And to kick this season off, we began with my brother, Brian Monahan, introducing him and some of his ideas and interests.
So much fun. And that I think is also the key, is like, we got to have fun in this world. There's so much, especially if you're doing work in conservation and things like that. It's just, the content's often pretty bleak. And so if the message isn't a good news, but that doesn't mean we can't still say it joyously. Right. And to exalt in the majesty of the moment, even if that majesty is in opposition to what we want it to be, our individual preferences, we can still hold a devotional relationship to it.
Then I spoke with our collaborator, Jan Hania, an accomplished veteran in the philanthropic and conservation space of Aotearoa, about Mount Taranaki, which was recently granted legal rights of personhood.
Which puts that maunga as the third iteration of legal personhood in Aotearoa. Te Urewera, Tauatupa, Whanganui River are the first two, and Taranaki maunga is the third and has some other nuances to its construct.
Our epic neighbor and friend, Dr. Jessica Hutchings, spit fire calling for legal rights of personhood for soils, putting huaparakore, which is Māori organics, into a broader frame of rematriation and global movements.
Huaparakore very much connects to and speaks with movements like rematriation, which is about, the returning of the sacred back to the land, the returning of the sacred back to Earth Mama, to Pachamama, to Papa Tuanuku, to whoever those deities are. And so it's more than just growing Māori organic food. It's a movement for change. It's a fracturing and a return back, to restore our Indigenous foodways.
Activist and filmmaker Jeff Reed shared about the critical importance of managing invasive weeds in New Zealand, which poses a huge threat to the country's biodiversity.
Well, when we look around, we know that we're in, our biodiversity is in freefall. Here in Aotearoa, New Zealand, we've got, about 4,000 species that are dropping off the face of the planet, and that's pretty alarming.
Now, this show is intended to really get at the questions of how do we change our economic and monetary system to be compatible with conditions for life. Peter Hanford is a veteran in New Zealand forestry, and he shared his vision for healthy and thriving forests in New Zealand built around a bioeconomy and some common sense insights like this one.
If I just take the forestry example, we do discounted cash flow analysis, which is, it's a bit dry and boring, but effectively what you're doing is that you're discounting revenue that's in the future by an annual interest rate. So you just right there and then you're saying, the future's less important,
right.
Which is a bit of a flawed approach.
Going deeper into the topics of money, Jerry Ward from EY New Zealand and Dean Spicer from ANZ Bank discuss what they're seeing at the largest financial institutions and corporates around sustainability.
New Zealand is the first country in the world to adopt that mandatorily So from this year, 200 New Zealand companies are mandated legally to disclose their climate-related risks as part of their annual report, which is huge.
When we think about climate risk, it's probably a risk like we've never dealt with before.
From New Zealand, we then went to New York Climate Week. It was my first Climate Week, and I was blown away by the convergence of so many movements coming together for a jam-packed week. One big theme of our interviews was around policies and laws, and I was privileged to sit down with leaders in the rights of nature movement, including Natalia Green from the Global Alliance for the Rights of Nature and Grant Wilson from Earth Law Center.
There are more than 100 communities that have passed rights of nature ordinances. So this is happening all over the world.
To say that we're not nature is really a radical departure from what people have known since time immemorial. And so we're in this like tiny little window of 500 years when we've just like totally gone off the rails.
And one of my favorite, and I think most underrated conversations from season 2 was with Jojo Mehta of Stop Ecocide International. Ecocide is about criminalizing unlawful and wanton acts of widespread habitat destruction in the highest international criminal courts.
What this speaks to is a profound cultural issue. We have a deeply ingrained taboo around harming people, but we don't have that same taboo around harming nature.
Another big idea we discussed is the fossil fuel non-proliferation treaty being championed by Zipporah Berman.
We need to talk about oil, gas, and coal, whether we can replace them, how we can replace them, how quickly we can replace them, and how we're going to cooperate to stop them expanding right away.
Building on that fire and enthusiasm, I had a fascinating conversation with author, organizer, and clinical psychologist Margaret Klein Solomon as she laid out the stunning case for why funding nonviolent disruptive protests is one of the highest ROI activities climate funders can do.
I think there's only one way, and that is through people power, the power of social movements, which throughout history been the fastest way to create transformative change.
Oscar Soria helped lead campaigns at Avaz and has been an advocate for Indigenous rights in global climate accords like the Kunming-Montreal Agreement.
What we're seeing now is kind of a slow reflect where countries are realizing that this financial architecture needs to change in order just to make an economy that works for the people and the planet.
We also had a great lineup of leading climate finance investors and founders who are directing some of the top emerging funds in the field. Here are clips from those discussions.
There's 3 epochs. The first one is material productivity. The second one is moving toward the optimization of metabolic flows as opposed to just dealing with the noun and materials. And then the third one is called the maximization of diverse nutrient flows, which is also a synonym for the algorithm for all of life in the universe.
So looking at genomics, looking at satellites, looking at, yes, AI. If we're able to leverage those in service of this biodiversity picture, I think it's pretty exciting.
The challenge is that dollars are sitting on the sidelines. And when it comes to environmental giving, we have an even greater challenge. Environmental giving in this country makes up roughly 3 to 4% of the total. And those are most estimates that have been generated over the last several years. And it's remained remarkably steady.
We have a lot further to go, and we have to engage with people that may not have our same views. By doing that, you get access to be in relationship with someone and to be able to actually affect change at a much bigger scale.
Currently, we got ourselves into a really interesting spot where 85% of people have nature as a screensaver, which tells you something about how we think about value, and where the only way sort of to bring it to market is by cutting it down.
Carbon markets and market-based solutions for ecosystem services weren't benefiting the exact people that help protect and help steward the most land and thus the most carbon. And that is, frankly, just farmers in general.
We also spoke with entrepreneurs who are working on tools and infrastructure, like Caitlin Archambault from Open Future Coalition and Effie Benaya de la Cruz on supply chain sustainability. After Climate Week, our next destination was Bristol, UK for the Planet Local Summit, organized by Helena Norberg Hodge.
Build up clear, connected resistance that needs to be translating quickly into a new politics. It needs to be translating very quickly to going beyond left and right, not getting caught up into how can I identify that handsome, articulate individual to step into the prime minister role or president role to suddenly change the whole system. We need movements to articulate and build up the pressure for that. I believe that the single most important issue today, in order to build that up, is the clarity that you and I and everybody else is getting poorer as we continue down a direction that is decimating nature. It is actually decimating us as well.
At the Planet Local Summit, we found ourselves going deep into philosophical questions, questioning our usual approaches, and excavating ideas at the edges of our normal discourse.
The money wants to flow. It wants to be liberated. It wants to be re-experienced and put to use. And what's happening in a lot of philanthropy and foundations is it's getting hoarded so that it can make more.
The other thing that I keep thinking or trying to base my actions on is that we've got nothing to lose. The current dominant status quo way of being is frankly suicidal. Not just suicidal, taking down a whole bunch of other stuff at the same time. So taking self-questioning, brave experiments and trying to act on them is what's left.
Capitalism has a prime directive, which is to grow capital. It's as simple as that, and by any means necessary. The extraction, destruction of the living world, the invention of compound interest, it doesn't matter what it is, it's the growth of capital by any means necessary. That's the simple definition of capitalism. By post-capitalism, we're not referring to a system that will come after capitalism. It's not post-capitalism. It's not, post is not temporal solely. Post, we use it in the same way that academics talk about postmodernity, informed by modernity. And so we want to be informed by this 500-year experiment in modern capitalism.
And what is it to be in solidarity? This is an ever ongoing praxis. It is a way that I have to live, and it is not a one time and it's done. It is not just give a grant. It is having to listen at a subtle level and stay in the relationality for what is.
At the end of the day, we can't sit here in Bristol and, say what the Mayan communities might want, right? In the Mexican jungle. Like, I know some of them don't want carbon credits, and some of them are like, we want it. It's not for us to impose our system in that way, although the system has already been imposed for thousands of years. So it's a super strange tension.
All of these are organs of a living being. In a human body, when you take in a lot of toxins and you do all kinds of, you're drinking too much and you're using drugs, and this organ is degrading and that one is degrading, and then eventually you get a fever. And, where's the virus? What's causing this fever? Well, maybe it's because your entire system cannot regulate itself anymore. So the obsession with carbon dioxide and greenhouse gases focuses all of our attention and our solutions onto that very narrow part of the problem.
I think our time requires animistic moves and gestures in the minor key instead of the major key. The reason why we're feeling impoverished is that the major key doesn't really lend itself to danceability. It doesn't lend itself to bodies in movement. It's stuck in a militaristic march to get to the other side, to save ourselves. But as compassionately as one can respond to that, one also has to notice that the trouble is how we are responding to this crisis.
The meta-crisis, thinkers are suggesting is that these crises are interrelated, first of all, and secondly, that they have common drivers, or often they're referred to in this world as generator functions. And one example of a generator function, it would be multipolar traps. So people likely be familiar with this idea in the context of the arms race or tragedy of the commons. It has a few different manifestations.
And so part of this work is actually about rewilding morality. It's about reclaiming that word and that term and combining that with the power and the force of imagination and creativity, which is essentially like our life force.
After Planet Local Summit, our next destination was the Earth Commons event in Berkeley, filled with gigabrains across tech, academia, and the climate space. We kicked off with a panel with the event organizers, hearing about the vision for Earth Commons and how it fits within the broader Funding the Commons event and Funding Public Goods Lab Week by Protocol Labs. We also heard reflections on the marketing approach for this intersection where crypto meets climate. I loved the discussion we had about how blockchains can support planting 1 trillion trees. These ideas are still in their formative stages, but it was exciting to meet the builders of these systems and see how they're making their protocols interoperable.
There are 70,000 tree species, and we sort of need to bring precision agriculture to restoration, to reforestation, right? Mm-hmm. And so we need species and location-specific methodologies, to Alan's point. There's a lot of nuance, but all of this can be captured via sort of unique claim types or claim events.
We don't actually have a trust architecture in online right now where we're able to verify this group of people, this community, has reached a conclusion about how to do this particular type of accounting, natural capital accounting, for example, and allowing that to sort of propagate through these systems.
In general, it's just a digital impact certificate. And so what we try to do with a hypercert is create transparency around who did what when. So, and that kind of layer can then be applied to kind of tree planting as an action, who planted trees when, and in that way, like issue publics who think about how to evaluate the benefits of trees. And then if we combine that in a transparent way that is observable to everyone, then we can combine it with transparent flows of capital.
Another group conversation we had was around ecological institutions, building on a paper recently released by Austin Wade Smith, theorizing on the frontiers of computational law, governance, and the more than human world.
The idea of institutional forms being open to a more ecological interpretation, I think, is one of these patterns that we're talking about remembering.
Exclosures is a concept that I've been working on and that several others have been feeding into over the last few years. And the idea is to really give a name to a class of sort of systems design or institutions that have the quality of kind of self-defending autonomy.
I think one of the interesting things that gathers us here to kind of point to the autonomy, conviviality, the autonomy interdependence dynamic is that we've come to a place within protocols where we can create autonomous agents that do incredible things, all the more to realize that we are so fundamentally interdependent with those systems.
The Earth Commons event was filled with surprises. Somehow, I even managed to interview a puppet who is also the author of Hoodie Economics.
Are you going to get me a coffee soon? You said I'll get a coffee.
Another exciting development in community conversation was around bioregional financing facilities, or BFFs for short. This is a concept originating with Samantha Power. It was originally a research paper. Now it's become a book, and we featured a couple different conversations about the topic.
So bioregional financing facilities are kind of my response to the poly crisis and the increasing concentration of wealth that our current economic system is driving, and the lack of resources that regenerative projects around the world have access to.
We're between stories, and it's just noisy and jittery because there's all this capital tied up in things that are destructive and extractive. And it needs to be restructured, renegotiated. We have to fight dollar by dollar to move these transactions into life-affirming patterning. So bioregional financing facilities are the bridge, because right now they're able to accept very large pools of recognizable national currency money.
We spotlighted a pilot project happening deep in the Amazon rainforest around biocultural jaguar credits. And as always, I appreciate Atosa Saltani for grounding us in the urgency and importance of forest protection and serving frontline communities.
This year, the drought in the Amazon was the worst in 120 years of recorded history, partly because of global warming, but also because of deforestation has destabilized that system. And we're seeing a collapse of the hydrological system. We're seeing an unraveling of the forest, which really spells, disaster for the climate. It's a tipping point that could tip all the other planetary tipping points. And scientists are ringing the alarm bells saying, the Amazon's tipping, and we've got to act now to protect 80% of the forest and to restore 6% of the lost forest cover. So it's critical we take action, and soon. So I gave that context, and then really the work was about how do you center solutions on Indigenous wisdom, on marginalized communities, in getting the money to the front lines. Literally less than 1% of all commitments to climate and biodiversity programs ends up reaching the communities on the ground and the territories. So, Sacred Headwaters is creating this, alliance that Indigenous peoples get to basically lead and govern, and creating mechanisms to get the funding to the front lines.
If we're going to be bringing financial tools to bear to protect and regenerate living systems, and if we're going to be, interfacing between Indigenous communities and the global monetary economy, I think Regen Network has the thesis that the agency and power and tools really need to be held and governed by the communities themselves.
Both Sylvie, one of those projects around the trillion trees, and the Jaguar Eco Credits were amongst our 23 regenerative land projects participating in Ma Earth's first ever quadratic funding round. I shared about this initiative on stage at the Earth Commons event. The round was powered by Gitcoin and in conjunction with Gitcoin Grants Round 20. We got a chance to speak with other community quadratic funding rounds like the Climate Coordination Network and Open Civic, as well as Gitcoin's founder, Kevin Owaki.
So quadratic funding is a really powerful way to get people to fund what matters in their community. When you give $1 to a project with quadratic funding, it can actually mean up to $100 or sometimes even $1,000 worth of support for that project. The powerful thing about quadratic funding is that we're matching funds from the crowd with a central matching pool, but that match isn't based off of the amount that each project raises, it's based off of the breadth of the contributors.
We ran Ma Earth Grants Round for 2 weeks and received over 1,000 donations from 420 unique contributors, totaling over $160,000 of ETH that went into regenerative land projects around the world. We were absolutely thrilled with the results. We onboarded a lot of first-timers on-chain through the tutorials and community calls in what was one of the first ever examples of a Web3 community funding round that went directly into land projects. This was a new chapter for Ma Earth to work on the infrastructure connecting funding flows to frontlines regeneration. If you want to learn more, just go to maearth.com/grants. And I also posted some of my reflections on our new blog on Paragraph. And then in our final location of the season, we brought it home to Aotearoa, New Zealand, for a diverse ensemble of conversations about climate regulations, storytelling, activism, biodiversity monitoring, and farming.
It's a huge alphabet soup out there, but I'll start with climate-related disclosures. They are regulations that require large companies, usually listed companies, to measure and disclose their carbon emissions and also their climate risks.
Sometimes we underestimate the audience's ability to story read. We always talk about like the good storytelling. So I think all of us have a capacity to story read and actually also to tell.
So you're getting this nice synthesis between science, technology, and Indigenous knowledge. And I think that is kind of a critical bridge we need as a species, I suppose, to confront some of the core environmental challenges that we're facing.
The people who are choosing to get into agriculture are obviously ignoring market signals because every market signal would tell you this is not the correct place to put your life's energy.
It's not about one group winning over the other, but finding out where the need is that they're really trying to meet and challenging our own values and attitudes often along the way.
Kay Baxter of Kawanga Institute delivered what became our most popular episode of season 2, where she talked about regeneration and seed saving.
We're not renewing our resource base, it's not regenerative, and it's the resource base is the earth and our ecosystems and like all of life. So I feel like part of this revolution is growing our own seeds or buying seeds from people who are growing seeds from your own local area that are open pollinated seeds.
And lastly, Brother BMO brought us full circle by hosting the final episode and putting me in the hot seat as I reflected on the Ma Earth journey in what was our 100th conversation. It's really, at this stage, driven by the vision that we can do a better job as a collective species of aligning our monetary incentives and systems with planetary and ecological health. It's been a heck of a first year launching Ma Earth. Thank you to everyone who participated in seasons 1 and 2. It's exciting to see the channels continuing to grow. High fives to the team and collaborators who make this all possible. And a special thanks to you for listening, watching, tuning in, and engaging. We have more energy and enthusiasm for this work than ever. I've been recharging at the beach, but we're already underway on season 3. We recorded some conversations at SF Climate Week and another batch of interviews in New Zealand. If you've made it this far, please don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. The algorithms do make a huge difference in how far these ideas go, and we want to keep delivering you with high quality, in-depth conversations, so your support makes all of the difference. If you're feeling generous, give us a 5-star rating on Spotify and Apple Podcasts, comment on YouTube, share on LinkedIn, Instagram, and Farcaster. And most importantly, I want to invite you to join our new weekly newsletter where we're going to send out notes about what's happening in the regenerative economy and finance space. And if you want to go even deeper, we are looking for more collaborators. You can find our open job roles at maearth.com. Thanks for tuning in and joining us on this regeneration revolution. I'll see you in season 3.